Hello! Welcome to my stream. My name's EC, and I like to have respectful conversations about nuanced topics. Today, I'm continuing, I guess, part 2 of my, what do you call this? In honor of World Goth Day series, where I explore different components of Goth culture and how it has changed throughout time. Last time, we talked about seminal Goth movies and explored some of the cultural, political, and sociological components that went into the popularization and, I guess, structure of a lot of Goth films and how they connected to horror genres as well as all the way back to Gothic literature. Today, we're going to be talking about Goth fashion, which we definitely touched on in my last stream, but we're going to be exploring a little bit more today. Hi Shadow! Hello, hello, how are you? Last time I went for a bit of a different look. This time I'm going for something, I guess you could say, I don't know what you would call this, if this is more alternative, but it's my own thing. I guess this is definitely something that I will wear when I go out into my local community, local scene. And there are different components and elements that have drawn from mainstays of Goth fashion for a long time. I guess this is a little bit more of a harkening back to, what do you call it? The romantic eras and more vampiric components of influence on Goth fashion and culture, but I'm also including like things like this, which are legitimate bondage gear that is a huge mainstay of Goth fashion as well. So we're going to be just exploring a little bit of all of it today. Everything from corporate goth to cyber goth to mall goth to pastel goth to all the different kind of sub-genres and cultural components that technically qualify as part of like goth fashion, but have their own structures and stylized rules about how that works. Shadow, why are you upset? What's going on? You okay? What? I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're alive. But I hope whatever it is that's troubling you is something you can find release for. But yeah, okay. So where do I start with this? It's funny because I know that, you know, if you look into a lot of online structures and like online resources for how Goth fashion developed, you do often get commentary about where Goths actually started, and it was not a counterculture movement. It was a nomadic group of people all the way back in like mid-Roman era, middle to Dark Ages times of, I guess you could say, like full cultural components of people who were trying to fight the Roman Empire and actually succeeded for a period of time, who had settled in Spain and Italy. And there were two distinct groups of those people, and part of what they wanted to do was to separate themselves aesthetically from Roman culture and Roman stylings. Oh man, Oro's upset. Slytherin EC. Hi Ellie. Hello, hello. I guess that's one way you could say it for sure. There's a definitely with the green and everything, but I just want to try something different. But yeah, they're very distinct groups, and where the concept of goth actually comes from does of course have a very long-standing history that over time affected so many different components of society and culture all the way back to the Middle Ages and Dark Ages, and were very much contrasted by the Renaissance which followed it. But the Goths, and there was the Visigoths and the, oh gosh, how am I forgetting this now? There were the Visigoths and then the, oh man, I have to remember. I have to look this back up again. How am I forgetting? Okay. But yes, there were two distinct Goth groups that of like cultural groups who were nomadic peoples who had traveled all over and ended up settling in Spain and Italy and fought off the Roman Empire for a short amount of time and decided to create their own aesthetics as a way to identify their own cultural structures in that. So they actually led to a lot of the what is now known as Gothic architecture, that is the kind of cathedral style of those pointed arches with thinner walls and very soaring eye lines when it comes to how the architecture manifested. And I'm just checking to it was just the Goths and the Ostrogoths. That's what it was. The Ostrogoths and the Visigoths. There we go. And that actually became a really interesting but unexpected component that led many years later to some of the naming conventions behind why Goth is called Goth. Hello, Brant. Hello. How are you? Happy Wednesday. Good evening. But yes, so I'm kind of doing a bit of a retrospective on Goth fashion, and I'm also exploring a little bit about where Goth technically started in a cultural sense, which was all the way back in Roman times, but not in the way that we perceive it today, which is, of course, a little bit more the way that I am dressing, with like kind of a darker aesthetic, very specific makeup styles, certain elements borrowed from other like subcultures and groups and things like that. But just a little bit of a history lesson there, where when the Renaissance came and the Roman Empire, okay, first, the Visigoths were able to last for about 200 years before the Roman Empire returned and destroyed them. And anything associated with that architectural or aesthetic style was deemed low class and bad. So that is a simplification, but still, it was definitely something that was seen as a conquered nation that had lost, and so it was often kind of relegated to a not ideal and not desired component and an aesthetic level. So fast forward again more time, you get to the Renaissance. In the Renaissance, there was a lot of idealization of Roman era structures and aesthetics, and that was not definitely viewed the Goths and the Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Visigoths, and their architectural styles, their aesthetic styles, as low class and negative, instead idealizing Roman stylings because they were the conquering nation that was able to come back after being conquered by, and I guess disrupted by the Goths and the Visigoths, the Goths and the Ostrogoths. Blah, blah, blah. How many times can I say Goth? Oh my gosh, the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths. Goths. There we go. And that actually stayed. That general sense stayed of this kind of darker aesthetic that was very much due, even though it wasn't intentionally meant to, due to the era and the technology available at the time, that the Visigoths and Ostrogoths had such an incredible effect on Italian and Spanish architecture, as well as other aesthetic components. And so what you see happening is this idealization within Renaissance culture of Roman era designs, which had a very different structure, significantly rounder column style designs and architectural layers. And again, this idealization of that era then also went on to influence later eras as that cycle repeated, of there being an interest in kind of the counterculture of the Austro and Visigoth styles and aesthetics to the Roman styles and aesthetics. And that has actually been a bit of a ping pong back and forth stylistically, I guess you could say, ever since. Brant asks, but why do modern day Goths borrow from that period? That's a good question. I actually don't know how many of the Goths who cemented the culture as a style and as a design, I guess as a design choice, if it was a conscious decision, but on a sociological level, especially in European nations where a lot of this developed, that contrast between Roman as the kind of conservative ideal and the Goth architectural styles that were able to maintain and stick around as the alternative structure maintained itself again and again and again throughout time. And that actually had a lot of effect on the kind of literature that ultimately, and then movie making, that had a huge effect on Gothic styles. Another huge component of that was because of the major world war in First World War, World War I, changing the access of certain countries within Europe to financial success, because Germany obviously lost World War I, and it led to an incredible depression of the German economic structure. Many people were feeling as well isolated and removed from senses of stability or happiness. And so there was a reflection of that within the media that was created at that time in the 1920s. Whereas the rest of Europe, especially within the United States as well, you were seeing this massive boom. It was the not the Gilded Age, but it was this era of like The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and these I guess economic boom for many people in the wake of World War I, where a lot of people did not want to acknowledge or maintain the horror of what everyone had just survived from World War I. And Germany was very much cut off from that. So you saw this rise in something that was now called German Expressionism in film, with these kind of art house films that, like Nosferatu and The Vampire and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which came out in 1920, and Nosferatu in 22, which were exploring this sense of disconnection, alienation, and depression that came from, on a countrywide level, having deep economic instability, losing a sense of national pride, and feeling overwhelmed by the darkness of what took over the world. It was almost as if Germany was kind of left with on a social level, with dealing with the most intense components and the horrific components of the war. And that didn't go well, as we all know. Yes, exactly, Brant. Brant's also identifying, well, some of it was freedom of expression in West Germany as opposed to the closed-off East Germany. That is true. I don't exactly know when that started. I'm wondering, East and West Germany, when was that established? Because I had the idea that it was a little bit more World War II, but it absolutely continued to affect the aesthetics of counterculture and darker movements post that era. So let's see. Yeah, okay. 1949 is technically when East and West Germany were separated, but they were reunified in 1989-1990. And the final agreement was effective in 1991. Yes. And the fall of Berlin Wall. Okay. Yes. Yes, it was after World War II. Ooh, Haxum. I love that name. Let me look that up. So Ellie is talking about the movie Haxum that came out in that a silent film. So, oh wow, 1922. This is beautiful. It's like Art Nouveau and Gothic all mixed together, which makes a lot of sense. Oh, the stylings of this is amazing. Oh my god, I have to watch this movie. Oh, you have such great film knowledge. Oh my gosh. But yes, so all of that did have a huge effect musically, socially, politically, stylistically, and continued to do so throughout World War II. And then, of course, with the very intense worldwide difficulties of overcoming World War II that happened, especially within Europe, because Europe was the main, nothing, it had the most well-known battlefields of the war, and so a lot of spaces that were deemed as beyond the era of being in the middle of these intense horrors that humanity is capable of were now riddled with bullets and like the results of bombs, and a lot of towns were completely destroyed, and of course Germany did not do well in that either. So Grant says the Berlin Wall is something to see. There are pieces in a lot of places. Yes. Yeah, I found out my cousin was actually at that and has a piece of the Berlin Wall when they ripped it down. I was very surprised. I was very surprised. But anyways, he's also an ethnomusicologist. He's always in all these interesting places. But let's see. Okay, so you have this development happening where the concept of goth maybe isn't always being identified as relating to this dark ages nomadic group that were able to shake off the incredible yoke of the Roman Empire, at least for a short period of time. But that mentality did still affect through the rest of time since, where that was very effective, especially in Victorian era Western Europe, where a lot of